Welcome to Heart with Dr. Nieca. And today we have an interesting program. I'm going to be interviewing DC-based radiologist Dr. Mark Klein about his new book. His new book is entitled Franklin Rock, and it's a novel. And I was really quite taken by this book because it's a book that is about is about someone who is goal is to make the world a better place and has a lot of positivity, and it's just what we all need right now. And I'm going to talk to Dr. Mark Klein about his book as well as his work as a radiologist and how we tie this all together. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you for inviting me, Nieca. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you. So, how, I pretty much know what a radiologist does because I've been to medical school, but also I live with a radiologist. My husband is one. And, I was curious. I know you've written some nonfiction books, but what made you decide to write this novel? And we'll go into talking about it.
Well, you're a physician. It's easy to talk to another physician because most of us are motivated by this desire to help people. I say it's a doctor's addiction. It's really the number one addiction. You get addicted to helping people. You get addicted to knowing you've made a positive difference in somebody's life. I always call those the golden handcuffs of medicine. That's what keeps us coming back every day. We want to make a living, but you get that great feeling when somebody really appreciates what you've done. I know it's happened to you thousands of times, and that's what keeps us going. So since we do that on an individual basis, I've had this desire for a long time. This is going to sound a little crazy, but I promise you it's true. I've had this sense that I really needed to do more, that I needed to expand that one-on-one goal of helping people to widening it to a wider range of people. Well, how do you do that? Well, I don't have a TV show, right? I'm not a famous person. So I started writing, and my first two books, as you mentioned, were nonfiction. One was a self-help book. One was really a philosophy book about the purpose of life. I tend to chew off very small topics, right? So the purpose of life. As you mentioned, Franklin Rock's mission is to make the world a better place, literally to fix the world. So, having written those first two nonfiction books, I said, well, how can I get more people to read these things? And I'm not looking to get, as you know, we've had careers. I'm not looking to become a famous author that's not the goal. The goal is to make the difference. So I thought, well, maybe I should try putting that message in a fictionalized form, because people love stories. Everybody loves a story. So I figured if I could write a really good story and shove in some of this good philosophy that I think is so important, maybe it would work. And one of the terrible analogies I've concocted, which, I mean, it's a really bad analogy, but it kind of is funny. I kind of describe Franklin Rock as ice cream with vegetables in them. So, and when you think about it, you go, who would ever want to eat ice cream with vegetables?
It sounds gross,
Totally gross.
I'm someone who is a big proponent of vegetables.
Right, exactly. So, I preface this by saying it was a terrible analogy, but the point is you try and get something sweet, a good story, but while you're telling this story, you're trying to convey what I think are some very valuable and important concepts for people. And as you mentioned, this is an extremely optimistic book. I hope when you were done with the book, you had a smile on your face at the end.
Yeah, I want to delve a little deeper into your book and its lead character of Franklin Rock, because Franklin, we start off with Franklin when he's kind of in college, and he has it's interesting, he has classmates that are a little more goal directed. Someone's going to go study to graduate school, two of his friends are going to medical school, and he really didn't seem to have like a major,
or a clue.
And I found that very interesting. And I also found that he would have these moments where he travels in time, and he manages to meet some really famous people who have done good and done very thought-provoking things. So I want you to talk about these moments that Franklin has when he travels through time.
Right. So, some people would say, is this really this is a science fiction book? Is this a time travel science fiction book? No. Time
I
travel,
couldn't tell if he had a split personality at the beginning. So I just wanted, I like, being you were a doctor, I was looking at like, maybe this is medical. Like, what's the clue here? But then I
no, he doesn't have any, Franklin doesn't have any diseases. He's not schizophrenic. Although I did enjoy psychiatry and I was in medical school, but I decided I didn't want to do that full time. But no, he doesn't have any mental illness or physical illness. He's confused because when he starts, he's, I think, 19, 20 years old. So, it's not unusual to be confused when you're 19 or 20 years old. But the time travel is more of a vehicle. It's a tool. It's a tool for him to learn about himself, to learn about his mission. And as you probably remember in the book, most of these are accidental. He doesn't, sit back and dial up a date and shove back in
go
time.
there.
And he ends up places in the beginning that he has no idea why and how. And at first, it's rather frightening to him until he gets the hang of it. So the time travel is a vehicle for Franklin to progress, to evolve, to learn. And then later in the book, you mentioned he meets some very interesting people, and he does. He meets Albert Einstein a couple of times. Now, I'm an Albert Einstein fan. I love Albert Einstein. Although I think if I met him in real life, he would look at me and go, "You're not intelligent enough for me to talk to," because you get the feeling when you try and read his works that they're way over your head. Anyway. And then he also meets Carl Jung, the famous psychiatrist who specializes in dreams. And of course, Franklin's having dreams and visions, and that's a very, I think, a very interesting chapter. And then he also talks to Martin Luther King Jr.
Right.
Of course, we just happened to have Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday a week ago, holiday a week ago. But Franklin does talk to him, and he talks to him specifically to answer a specific question. Which people will figure that out when they get to that in the book. I don't want to ruin it. But those chapters actually were probably the most fun for me to write, because I had no idea when I started this book that I was going to have Franklin Rock time travel and talk to famous people. It never entered my mind until I got to the point in the book and I went, this would be a really good time for him to get some advice from some really smart people. And they worked out, and I think those are some of my favorite chapters.
Right, and I think you bring up a good point in this book about having mentors, because his professor was his mentor, I think even in our own work we all have mentors, and sometimes, and as Franklin thinks back and travels back to meet his mentor, that we also sometimes think about our mentors.
I think that's a good point. I was talking to somebody about this very topic the other day, a friend of mine, and I think if you're lucky enough to have really smart, insightful, calm parents, right, they're probably the best mentors. A lot of us aren't that lucky. Our parents have their own things, and maybe they didn't have mentors, and so maybe they're not equipped necessarily to be the kind of mentor we want. And then I think that's one of the reasons we look for other mentors, because we can't really count on our parents to teach us everything, even the best ones. And so we all look for mentors in different ways. You mentioned in medicine. So there's usually somebody you've run across along the way who just really impressed you. Maybe that's why you chose cardiology. And that happens a lot. In Franklin's case, he was lost. As you said, he was basically clueless.
Really?
But he knew who he had to talk to because he had met this professor earlier. And sure enough, they developed this relationship, and the professor, his name is Charles Niemeyer, turns out to be quite an interesting, fascinating person in his own right. And so he does become Franklin's mentor, and their relationship along the way evolves just as Franklin does as he gets older. And I think their relationship is quite interesting. And I think, as you said, having a mentor is quite advantageous in life.
Yeah. So now, one of the things, not to give too much away from the book, because I think everyone should read it.
Oh, that's so kind.
Make their conclusions. But we'll talk about how Franklin is also a change agent, and he has situations where he takes, people in really bad situation and helps to change them where they have a more positive environment. And, I know that you do that in your work.
About 2 years ago, I have a very interesting kind of practice. Even though I'm a radiologist, I see sometimes 30 patients a day. It's a very hands-on practice. It's a rather unusual radiology practice. Many people say, radiology, what does that do? But I actually see patients. I happen to do a lot of women's imaging. That's one of the reasons. So I get to talk to a lot of patients all the time, like thousands over the years, many, many thousands. And about 2 years ago, one of my technologists said to me, she says, they're having a problem with a patient. And she said, I told them to come get you. And we had like 60 technologists in the facility. And she said, don't you know what we call you? I go, no, what do you call me? He goes, oh, we call you the patient whisperer. I said, you do? She goes, yeah, you can turn everybody around. And I never even thought about that. But I think maybe that's why Franklin has that, as you just mentioned, that desire and ability to take people who are having difficulties or in situations and flip them a little bit. I think, as you well know, you're a physician. I'm sure, I know your patients love you, but you get your difficult patients, right? And the question is,
Really challenging. And I think one of the things that I guess Colleen Landry, who's a nurse practitioner that works with me, and she's my friend for like a really long time, has noticed, oftentimes people don't realize when they write you messages through the secure portal, sometimes I think they don't realize the tone that they take. And I think Colleen goes, wow, that person is really nasty. And then I look at the message and say it's a different way. And oftentimes it's a long-winded message. Although I will tell you a secret that I was one of the people at a meeting who said we have to decrease the word count on the MyChart messages. Because it's very hard as a doctor to process a lot of information. We're very good at very clear things, and it takes a lot of time. So what I do is a person will send a message, and I'll say, dear so and so, and write out numerically 1, 2, 3, so they understand that I've read it. And when it comes to the point that something is, I say the last one, you need to come in for a visit. So it's a way that I'm teaching, I think people write these messages not because they're angry, because they're scared.
exactly. I always, I used to have this monthly meeting with my staff. And I said there's about 60 of them. And I would say to them, the reason to be nice to patients, when a patient comes in, they are almost always scared about something they have or worried what they might have, right? So they're at a disadvantage, they're frightened. So if you just show them some kindness, some understanding, and I think a very important thing we don't do in this country, certainly enough, is judge favorably, assume the best intent. If it turns out you're wrong and it really was a nasty, horrible person, okay. But most of the time, it's not going to be. Most of the time, they're going to be worried or scared, especially in a medical situation, but really in many situations. So if you judge favorably, if you assume the best, that's going to put you in the best state. And I used to tell my staff, I said, the reason to be nice to patients is not so much that they deserve it and you're going to help them, but you're going to feel better. You will be happier. You will, at the end of the day, feel like you've made a difference. And like we said before, that's the magic of medicine, right? That sense of that you've helped somebody, that you've made a difference.
Well, that's something you share with Franklin Rock because he gave that speech in the book. So are you Franklin Rock?
Oh goodness, I feel like I'm Clark Kent and Superman. Well, I think the first sentence in chapter 1, there's a short prologue, and in chapter 1, Franklin says the first thing he says is everything one writes is autobiographical. Maybe it happened, maybe you wished it had happened, maybe you thought that it happened, maybe you were afraid it would happen. But I think that's true for a lot of people that write. You've written, so you write. You have to pull your information from somewhere, and there are characters in there who are made out of whole cloth. I mean, they don't exist. They're not related to anybody. They just sound like a good idea. But there are other characters who come from somewhere else. So is there some Franklin Rock in me? Yeah, I always say, in a lot of ways, Franklin Rock is partially what I'd like to be. He has traits that I'd love to have, and as I've got older, I've tried. Like most of us, I've made a billion mistakes. Don't ask me to list them because this episode is not long enough. But but everybody makes mistakes. And the whole point is to evolve. You know, I always say, in politics, they always complain about flip-floppers. And I'm thinking, flip-floppers, I wouldn't vote for somebody who's not a flip-flopper. If you think the same thing 20 years now, later than you did 20 years ago, you haven't gotten anywhere, right?
No.
So you want people to change, you want people to evolve. So is there some of me and Franklin Rock? There's a lot of wishful me in Franklin Rock, probably.
That's yeah, I'm thinking of. And aside from Franklin, you know, is there other characters that you really like in the book or you're really fascinated by?
Yes, and you will relate to this because you're a physician, you've been in the hospital for years, and you meet these patients, and sometimes there's just something that clicks, or they touch you in a certain way. There's a character in the book named Maurice Burnside. He's an 80-something-year-old black guy who's happens to be in the hospital when Franklin is working in the hospital. So the two of them have like nothing in common, right?
Right.
But they end up having this amazing bond. Maurice, he's become a friend of mine. I mean, this guy I created out of nothing, but he was based on probably some patients I've seen over the years. Like you can understand that. But I love this guy. I love this character. I know he's not real. I have to remember he's not real, but I do love this character. And I think most people will love this character.
Yeah. So, and are you working on any new books or?
I am working on a music. So there will be another Franklin Rock story, another sequel. Because at the end of the book, there's a little foreshadowing, so that people will see. But as you might remember, so I'm working on that, and I'm actually working on also another nonfiction book. So it'll keep me busy for quite a while.
Yeah, and tell us about, you know, so how do you, I remember, you know, when I wrote my books, I used to do it after work and on weekends. So, you know, you're working as a radiologist. So how did you work that into your schedule?
This is a good story, Nieca. So I've been playing around with Franklin Rock for years, 7 or 8 years. I have a million notes, and I started playing. I wrote a few facsimiles of chapters a few years ago, but it was just kind of, I was always taking notes on my phone. I have a list of things that I wanted to put in the book, and I would just keep adding to it and adding to it. And then one day, March 9th is a Friday, I think it was. I might get the date wrong. And I went to work, saw patients, came home, and then COVID hit. And then Monday morning, we closed the office temporarily.
Right.
And I didn't know how long I'd be out. And I was on the older age group, so I was going to be the last one to show back up. So I said, boy, I'm going to have some time. This isn't going away tomorrow. So I said, okay, well, no excuse now. Sit down and write this book. So I took all my notes and I built on the things I'd already written. And and COVID actually gave me the opportunity to finish Franklin Rock.
That's really interesting. And you bring up a good point about the pandemic. You know, certainly how it's affected doctors who were in specialties other than those who were in the hospital taking care of COVID patients, especially when the pandemic hit in March and April and May. And, you know, did you work from home? Because, you know, radiology is one of the few fields that is technologically so advanced you could you know people were reading from home.
Yes, and if I had been that kind of radiologist, I would have. But because a lot of what I do is hands-on, really examining patients and so on, it really was I wasn't able to do that. And in the beginning, since we didn't really know what was going on, anybody over a certain age, we said, okay, just stay home and we'll let some, you know, when we get back gear up, we'll start with the younger doctors first. So I had a fair amount of time. My first two books, I did what you did. I wrote after work. And I think days, I don't know about you, but I think in the last 10 years, medicine seems to have gotten harder. The days have gotten longer, the demands have
Days are
increased.
longer. I think for someone like myself, some of the work that we do on the electronic medical record system is not always time saving. And you know, you try to keep up with your notes during the day, but I'm not one of those doctors. I'm not
Phone is ringing. Oh my God, I forgot to turn that off. I apologize.
not one of the doctors that types while my patient is talking. I actually look at them when they're talking to me so that I don't do it during the visit, and I walk out, and if I need to, I write some notes on the back of the
Well,
electrocardiogram.
good for you. Good for you, because I think the electronic medical record has pulled many cases the doctor away from the patient. And I think for you to do that, of course, it adds to your workload because you have to do that after the fact.
Yeah, but you know what I like about the electronic health record is actually that the patients can message me because I can control that. I really would get a lot of complaints from my patients when they call in. There's a call center and they feel like they're in an eternal phone tree, and it really frustrates them. So I say sign up for this, and I'm always answering the messages.
Yeah, right. But it does, it's great. And I think it's wonderful for patients. And I'm sure it's enjoyable for you, although it does kind of lengthen that day. So my point being, it's hard to come home and write a book when your
It
day
is.
has gotten longer, right?
It
By the
has.
time you get home and, if you want to exercise or whatever, and eat dinner, all of a sudden it's like, oh God, I'm too tired now. I've been up since 5:30 in the morning. I can't sit down and do any good writing at this point. So it's made it harder, I think.
So, so I want to talk a little bit on medicine just in the last few minutes that we have, because the pandemic has really affected people accessing other types of healthcare, particularly people delaying their mammograms. You said you do women's imaging, delaying their mammograms and bone density testing, or other sonograms that their doctors have recommended. Certainly, people have delayed their care on coming to the cardiologist, and they're coming in sicker now.
Mhm.
Um, so can you share that with us? Have people really delayed their mammograms and things? What do you?
Absolutely, absolutely. And in the beginning, because I've been doing this so long and I do a lot of mammography, I've had patients that I've had for years. I mean, some 25, 30 years, I've had some patients. And they want to see me, right? Because they're used to me. I always say, you want to see me. I might not be the smartest guy, but I know you like me, so so you want to see me, right? Patients don't know, right? That if they like you, that's what counts. But at any rate, so they've called me and they said, what should I do? And some of these patients are at the age where I go, you know what? It's the risk benefit, right? I'm not worried about you holding off your mammogram for a few months, but I am worried about you getting COVID. So in this case, I prefer you wait, and I'll call you. We'll talk again in a month or two or three. And so we've seen a lot of delays. The question is, what's the amount of time? Because again, you're weighing the risks. So like right now, you said the infection rate in New York is 3%. Okay, so that's livable. Okay, come in for
In
your mammogram.
Manhattan, it was
Okay,
3.4%.
Manhattan. So come in for your mammogram now. The risk is when it was 9, 10, 12%, that's probably not a good strategy, right? So you kind of have to weigh it. I think I'm very optimistic. Of course, I'm a super optimistic person. This book is
That's right.
very
So it's
optimistic. But
Franklin.
I always say we're not gonna walk out of this. We're gonna explode out of this in a good way, I believe. And so I think, for the cardiology patients who are acutely ill, and maybe they're not taking their medications, maybe they're diabetic, maybe they're whatever the issue may be that you take care of, that's a little riskier. But for screening examinations, I've mostly told patients, you can put it off a few months. It's not going to change anything. I don't worry about it. But the risk of getting COVID is higher than the risk of postponing the screening type of preventive care.
Right. So we've done that, and we actually at the beginning of the pandemic went to telemedicine. So I did a lot of my visits remotely, but went in once a week for people who needed to be seen in the office, meaning they needed an EKG, they needed me to really examine them.
Mhm.
And that worked out. And in June, we went back to our regular hours. And so far, the hospitalization rate is lower than right now due to COVID-19. Hospitalizations rate is lower than it was back in March, April, and May.
Thank God. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think, this is such an unusual time. We're going to see, uh, there are going to be a lot of surprises at the other end. I mean, I just know that. We'll discover like telemedicine has become a big deal. You may end up, your way you practice may change permanently. You don't know. So a lot of things are going to
I don't
change in
know.
health.
I think we've had an opportunity to improve telemedicine. And now I just got an email the other day about a remote stethoscope. So there are ways that we can take some real positives out of this pandemic. and it taught us how we can practice medicine in a way that may actually be more convenient for the patients.
So for instance, I could see having a scale in in a patient's house that electronically, they don't even have to read it.
They
It's
can
just
translate.
electronic tells you to say, okay, you gained 2 pounds, you're in failure. You need to have, we need to diurese you or something like that, right? So that would be,
More diuretic.
right, exactly. So,
And you save them a hospitalization, because heart failure is one of the leading causes of hospitalization in our country.
mhm, right. So there are lots of those things that are going to come out of this, I think. So,
Yeah, so I want everyone and remind them and show them your book, Franklin Rock. And I think this is a book that we should all read, because right now we need something that's very uplifting.
well, that was the
Good
plan.
job.
I really appreciate it, Nieca. Thank you for your really kind comments and taking the time to talk with me. It really, really.
Thank you
very
for
appreciated.
joining me, and we look forward to your next work, and we'll talk again.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.